Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're diving into 1968 Mexico City.
Wow.
You've given us a stack about the student movement leading up to the Olympics.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, the Olympics weren't the only thing heating up that year.
Such a fascinating period.
Right.
You have this international spotlight on Mexico, this promise of progress and modernity. But just under the surface, tensions are simmering, especially with students.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just a few disgruntled undergrads, right? We're talking a massive movement, tens of thousands strong, all standing up against an authoritarian regime.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's incredible is that their weapon of choice, peaceful protest.
And that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
These students really understood the power of public opinion, of making their voices heard on a global stage.
Yep.
But to fully grasp the magnitude of what happened,
Okay.
we need to rewind to July of '68.
Okay.
It all starts with what seems like a minor clash between students.
Okay.
Almost like something out of West Side Story,
Yeah.
but set against the backdrop of 1960s Mexico City.
Gotcha. Okay. So set the scene for us.
Yeah.
What was this clash about, and how did it spiral so quickly into a full-blown movement?
Well, it starts with this rivalry between two schools, and it escalates into a street fight, which, let's be honest, isn't that uncommon even today?
Sure.
But the police response
Yeah.
was anything but typical.
Okay.
The crackdown was brutal,
Wow.
wildly disproportionate.
Yeah.
And instead of intimidating the students, it ignited this wave of anger and resistance. And it spread like wildfire across the city.
You know, it's that old saying, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah, totally.
The government thought they were putting out a small fire, but they ended up dousing it in gasoline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's where the students' understanding of strategy, of organization, really comes into play.
Yeah.
They realize this isn't just about a single incident anymore.
Right.
They tap into this undercurrent of dissatisfaction with the government, with corruption, with the lack of basic democratic freedoms.
Yeah.
People who had been silent before suddenly found their voice.
Right, and they don't just complain, they take action.
Exactly.
They form their own council, the CNH,
Right.
and they
right.
present these really bold, clearly articulated demands to the government.
Yeah.
It's not just about ending police brutality. They're calling for freedom for political prisoners, repeal of repressive laws, genuine accountability from those in power.
Yeah, yeah.
Talk about a power move.
It's a brilliant tactical maneuver.
Yeah.
By forming the CNH, they demonstrate this level of political consciousness and organization that completely throws the authorities off guard.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a spontaneous outburst of youthful energy.
Yeah.
This was a direct challenge to the established order.
Wow.
And it terrified the government.
And the best part, it worked. Well, at least initially.
Yeah.
The movement explodes in size.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just students anymore. Teachers join in, workers, intellectuals, everyday citizens fed up with the status quo.
Right.
By cracking down so hard, the government accidentally gave birth to a revolution.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
A classic example of how these heavy-handed tactics can backfire spectacularly.
Yeah.
The government underestimated the power of a collective voice, of a people determined to fight for their rights.
Yeah.
And they were wholly unprepared for the creativity and sheer determination of these students.
And they weren't going down without a fight.
Exactly.
Right.
We see this in so many aspects of the movement.
Yeah.
Think about the sheer scale and audacity of these marches. The creativity of the student brigades.
Yeah.
Taking their message to the streets, engaging people in these dialogues, using art and performance to spread their message,
Yeah.
and the role of women in all of this.
Right.
Challenging societal norms.
Yeah.
Taking on leadership positions. I mean, that's huge for the time.
Huge.
This is a generation finding its voice.
Yeah.
And they were not afraid to use it.
Speaking of powerful voices,
Yeah.
the outline you provided mentions something called the March of Silence.
Right.
And it sounds incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as the movement gained momentum, the students recognized the need to diversify their tactics.
Okay.
They'd shown they could rally. They'd shown they could speak truth to power.
Yeah.
Now it was time for a different kind of statement.
Okay.
So on September 13th, over 250,000 people marched through the heart of Mexico City
Wow.
in absolute silence.
Wow.
Imagine that you, me,
Yeah.
everyone we know walking together,
Yeah.
united by this shared purpose, but without uttering a single word.
Oh, wow. I get chills just thinking about it.
Yeah.
The silence, especially in such massive numbers, it speaks volumes, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's deafening in its own way.
It is a powerful indictment of the government's attempts to silence them.
Right.
This testament to their discipline and unity.
Yeah.
The message was clear. We will not be silenced.
Right.
We will not be intimidated. We are here.
Yeah.
And we demand to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact of that silence,
Yeah.
that visual, it resonated deeply within Mexican society.
Yeah.
Even people who may have been hesitant to openly support the movement, they felt it.
What
It was a
happened?
turning point in the public consciousness.
But tragically, it seems like the government wasn't listening.
Yeah.
Or perhaps they were listening but chose a very different response.
Yeah.
Because, as we know, this story does not have a happy ending.
No, it doesn't.
No.
As the Olympics drew closer,
Mm-hmm.
the government, under President Diaz Ordaz, became increasingly paranoid,
Okay.
increasingly threatened by the movement's growing influence.
Right.
They saw this as a direct attack on their authority,
Mm-hmm.
a communist plot to destabilize the country,
Yeah.
to overshadow the Olympics.
Wow.
And they were determined to crush it, no matter the cost.
And crush it they did.
Right.
In one of the most horrific displays of state-sanctioned violence in modern Mexican history.
It's true.
It all culminated on October 2nd,
Yeah.
just 10 days before the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
A massive rally was planned in Tlatelolco,
Right.
a plaza in the heart of Mexico City.
Mhm.
Thousands gathered, students, workers, families, hoping for dialogue, for some kind of resolution.
Yeah.
Can you take us back to that day?
Yeah.
What happened at Tlatelolco?
What happened at Tlatelolco is a tragedy,
Yeah.
a scar on the conscience of Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
While those students and citizens gathered, full of hope,
Right?
the government was orchestrating a massacre.
Wow.
They surrounded the plaza with soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Snipers were positioned on rooftops.
Oh, wow.
Tanks rolled in.
Oh, my gosh.
And as the rally reached its peak,
Yeah.
the shooting began.
It's chilling. This
Mhm.
wasn't a crackdown. This was a calculated massacre.
It was.
And the worst part is the government's attempt to cover it up,
Yeah.
to downplay the magnitude of what they had done.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They controlled the media,
Mm-hmm.
shut down dissenting voices,
Right.
tried to paint this as a minor incident,
Yeah.
a necessary response to student provocation.
Wow.
They claimed only a handful of deaths.
Right.
But the truth, as we know, is far more horrific.
The official death toll, a pathetic 38.
Right. Right.
But thanks to the tireless work of journalists and historians, especially the investigation by The Guardian, we now know the real number is likely closer to 325.
Yeah.
And those are just the confirmed deaths.
Exactly.
The actual number could be even higher.
That's right.
Add to that the hundreds who were injured,
Yeah.
the thousands detained, many of whom were tortured, disappeared,
Yes.
simply for daring to dream of a better Mexico.
It was a blatant attempt to silence dissent,
Wow.
to instill fear in the hearts of anyone who dared to question their authority.
Yeah.
And for a time, it worked. But the memory of that day, the ghosts of Tlatelolco, they refused to be silenced.
It's almost like a wound that refuses to heal.
Yeah.
This constant reminder of the government's brutality
Right.
and the people's courage in the face of it.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't just about remembering the fallen, right? This wasn't just grief.
No.
It was fuel for the future.
Absolutely. The Tlatelolco Massacre became this turning point in modern Mexican history. It shattered any illusion of stability.
Right.
And it exposed the true nature of the regime for the whole world to see.
Yeah.
And perhaps most importantly, it planted the seeds for a future where such atrocities would never again be tolerated.
It's like that saying, they tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds.
Yeah.
The government thought they could silence dissent with bullets and disappearances. But they underestimated the power of memory,
Yeah.
of hope, of the unyielding human spirit.
And what I find so fascinating is how this collective memory, this shared experience of trauma and resistance became a driving force for change.
Yeah.
The government tried to erase it,
Right.
downplay it,
Yeah.
control the narrative.
Yeah.
But the people refused to let that happen.
Wow.
The spirit of 1968, it lived on in whispers, in clandestine meetings, in the hearts of those who knew the truth.
And that spirit, that refusal to be silenced, it eventually led to real, tangible change, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Tlatelolco Massacre, as horrific as it was,
Yeah.
it cracked the foundation of the authoritarian regime. It galvanized a new generation of activists,
Yeah.
of students, of everyday citizens who said, enough. The fight for human rights,
Yeah.
for democracy, for a more just and equitable Mexico, it didn't begin in 1968, but it found new energy,
Right.
new urgency in the aftermath of the massacre.
So while we can't rewrite history,
Right.
while the events of October 2nd, 1968 will forever be a stain on Mexico's past,
Yeah.
we can learn from them.
Absolutely.
We can honor the memory of those who were lost by continuing the fight for a better future.
Precisely, and that's the power of history, isn't it? It's not just about looking back. It's about understanding how the past shapes the present,
Right.
and how we can learn from it to create a better future.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from the initial student clashes to the tragedy of Tlatelolco and the enduring legacy of the 1968 movement.
Right.
It's a complex and emotional history,
It is.
and we've really just scratched the surface.
Right, and I think that's important for our listener to remember.
Yeah.
This deep dive has provided a framework, a broad understanding, but there's so much more to explore.
Exactly. And what I find so captivating about this period in Mexican history are the human stories.
Yeah.
So to our listener, I encourage you, don't let this be the end of your journey.
Right.
Seek out the personal accounts,
Yeah.
the testimonies of those who lived through this tumultuous time. Read their stories,
Yes.
listen to their voices, and you'll gain an even deeper appreciation for the courage, the resilience, and the enduring spirit of the 1968 generation.
Those individual stories, those voices from the past, they remind us that history isn't just dates and events.
Yeah.
It's about real people, their lives, their dreams, their struggles.
Yeah.
And by engaging with those stories, we keep their memory alive.
Right.
And we ensure that their sacrifices were not in vain.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the heart of 1968 Mexico City.
Okay.
We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic, another opportunity to learn, to explore, and to connect with the past in meaningful ways.
Sounds good.
Until then, keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and keep diving deep.